Hello everyone and welcome today. I invite you to discover the story of the man who could be nicknamed the unluckiest of the Second World War, or perhaps the luckiest. This is Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a young Japanese who was present in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, when the first nuclear bomb of the Second World War exploded above the city. Seriously injured, the man managed to return home to Nagasaki at the last minute. A day after his return, the man fell victim to the second atomic bomb of the conflict. For 60 years, Tsutomu Yamaguchi remained walled in silence, and it was only in the early 2000s that he revealed his incredible story. It is this moving story that I invite you to discover. August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m., Hiroshima. The sultry summer crushes the city. Horse-drawn carts, spice carriers, and businessmen on bicycles pass each other in great tumult. On the banks of the different arms of the Ota River, countless wooden houses mix pell-mell with a few masonry structures. At the start of the morning, the city is bustling with activity. A port city in southwest Japan, Hiroshima is an important link in the Japanese military-industrial complex. A logistics base and army resupply center, the city has so far been spared from American air raids. The young Tsutomu Yamaguchi walks lightly through the alleys. The 29-year-old engineer, originally from Nagasaki and employed by Mitsubishi Industries, has been on a business trip for 3 months. Since the beginning of the summer, the man has been working on a new tanker prototype. Today is his last day of work. The young father is delighted to find his wife and child remaining in Nagasaki. It is therefore carried by a sweet joy that he goes one last time to the Hiroshima shipyard. As he crosses a field towards his workplace, an unusual noise disturbs the peace of the place. Interrupted by the strange drone of a plane, Yamaguchi looks up at the sky. In the azure blue, he can see the silhouette of a plane passing over the city. A tiny object detaches from the aircraft. The curious shape falls slowly, suspended from a parachute. A few seconds later, the entire sky lights up, as if a gigantic lightning bolt of magnesium had spread above him. A huge noise rang out. Yamaguchi barely has time to throw himself into a ditch before a powerful shockwave sweeps the surrounding area. Yamaguchi is lifted into the air as if caught in a tornado. Before being thrown several meters away, the man fainted. After completing a 2,500 kilometers flight, an American B-29 bomber has just dropped Little Boy, the first atomic bomb of the Second World War. After 43 seconds of freefall, the new type of weapon explodes. 500 m above the heart of Hiroshima. A colossal energy, equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT, is released instantly. In a few fractions of seconds, life changes. In the center of the city, the incredible heat of the fireball chars everything. In the hypocenter of the explosion, the temperature rises to almost 4,000 degrees. Those below the falling point perish without even realizing what is happening to them. Several tens of thousands of men, women, and children are erased in the snap of a finger, as if they had never existed. Within a radius of 2 kilometers around the central point, everything is desolation. The shockwaves shattered buildings, winds of 300 to 800 kilometers per hour, devastated homes, and the wave of fire sparked fires in what remained of the city. Hiroshima is nothing more than a pile of rubble and ashes. In the cockpit of the B-29 Enodage, Bob Lewis, the co-pilot, gazes with fear at the mushroom cloud rising. He exclaims, "My God, what have we done?" When Yamaguchi opens his eyes, everything is dark. The city was plunged into darkness. The young man does not realize what has just happened. He struggles to see anything. Debris and dust kicked up by the atomic explosion created a veil of death that blots out the sun. The air is acrid, unbreathable. Ashes and a blackish rain of radioactive particles fall on the survivor. His ordeal has only just begun. Blessedly, Yamaguchi managed to get up. He is seriously injured. His forearms and face are burned, and his eardrums have exploded. Disoriented, trembling, wavering, the Japanese is lost. Suddenly, the man stops in his tracks and widens his eyes. A strange, mushroom-shaped cloud rises less than 2 kilometers away. Somehow, the engineer manages to reach the shipyard and finds Akira Iwanaga and Kuniyoshi Sato. The young man still managed to survive and recover from his injuries. However, he will never be able to erase the psychological trauma he suffered. The white-haired old man is sitting in his living room. A pencil in hand, he leans over his pages. He rereads his notes one last time. 90 pages to describe the nightmare he experienced more than half a century earlier. At 90 years old, Tsutomu Yamaguchi is getting ready for the first time in his life. The violence revealed its history. For 60 years, man walled himself in silence. Like several 100,000 Japanese who survived the atomic bombings, Yamaguchi is a hibakusha, a person affected by the bomb. Its survivors are victims of discrimination because their health makes them fragile and there are fears that their illness is hereditary. To preserve his family's reputation, Yamaguchi chose to sacrifice his history. But a dramatic event changes everything. In the early 2000s, his son died of widespread cancer. Deep down, Yamaguchi is convinced that this loss is the consequence of the nuclear bombing to which his child was exposed when he was barely 5 months old. Yamaguchi is devastated, but against all odds, he draws unshakable strength from this drama. This is how he decides to break his silence. He had deep wounds. 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 It means query the shadow. Meeting the high school students is a real liberation for Yamaguchi. The man swore to himself that no one would ever experience what he experienced again. From that day on, he devoted all his energy to advocating peace in the dismantling of nuclear arsenals. The same year, the Japanese flew to New York, his first trip outside Japan. He was invited to deliver a speech at the UN. Upon his arrival on American soil, Yamaguchi cannot help but feel like he is in enemy territory. He could never forgive the American government for causing so many deaths and razing 2 cities with their atomic bombs. But Yamaguchi has no resentment toward the American people. Until his last breath, Yamaguchi continues his fight and tells his story. Each time he addresses his audience, the man cannot contain his emotion, broken by the resurgence of his memories. Yamaguchi ends each speech with his favorite phrase, a call for the unity of humanity, which must, whatever the color of skin or origins, come together in peace and love. Seriously ill with stomach cancer, Yamaguchi is hospitalized. The old man's health is rapidly deteriorating. Nevertheless, from his hospital bed, Yamaguchi continues his fight. The old man gives interviews and responds to letters sent to him. On January 4, 2010, Tsutomu Yamaguchi died at the age of 93. A few days earlier, he had said in front of television cameras, "We must deliver an anti-nuclear message to the world. What must prevail is truth and conviction. My mission is complete." You should know that Japan officially recognized Tsutomu Yamaguchi as a victim of the 2 atomic bombs only in 2009, barely a year before his death. Even today, he is the only official victim of these 2 nuclear bombs. But you should know that unofficially, there are 165 people who suffered the same fate as Yamaguchi. As you could see in the story, Tsutomu Yamaguchi was deeply traumatized by the 2 nuclear bombings, and he had to live his whole life with this horrible memory. To better cope with these images that remained in his head, he became a poet and started writing little Japanese poems. I suggest you read one. The humans all die, piled up and burned. The fat that heals too spreads on the earth that will never dry. Two work colleagues who also survived the atomic explosion. The 3 men contemplate the stunned, the city reduced to ashes, and spend the night in an air raid shelter. August 7th, 1945, midnight, 16 hours after the explosion of the Hiroshima bomb, Harry Truman, President of the United States, speaks. He publicly reveals the existence of the nuclear bomb. The force to which the sun brings its power has been turned away against those who have waged war in the far west. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a torch of ruins from heaven, which has never been seen on this earth. August 7, 1945, 7 a.m., the horror. Yamaguchi, who has decided to go to the city's train station, leaves his makeshift shelter and discovers with horror the scene of the apocalypse. On his way, he crosses a nightmarish setting. On either side of the town reduced to pieces, fires, a few skeletons of buildings, and above all, bodies melted on the roads. Most bridges are nothing more than a tangled pile of scrap metal. When Yamaguchi and his two acolytes reach the Ota River, a hellish vision awaits them. Yamaguchi says, they looked like human teenagers. When the tide rose, these piles of bodies were carried up the river, and when the water level fell, these human rafts were again swept towards the sea. All arms of the river were infested with corpses. Yamaguchi reaches the station, which was partly spared from the explosion. The survivor boards a train crowded with dying wounded. On the night of August 7th to 8th, he left for Nagasaki, located 300 kilometers away. Their miraculous escapee arrives in Nagasaki at first light. He doesn't know it yet, but destiny will once again be against him. Upon arrival, Yamaguchi was immediately taken to the hospital. The survivor suffers terribly from his injuries. His body is covered with purulent blisters. His wounds have become affected, and fever has taken hold of him. The doctor who takes care of him, a former classmate, does not even recognize him. The black burns covering Yamaguchi's arms and face make him unrecognizable. His body bruised, bandaged from head to toe, the young engineer returns home and finds his mother, his wife, and his child. Relieved, his loved ones nevertheless struggle to recognize him. His mother says, "It's my son's ghost who visits us." Tsutomu Yamaguchi barely manages to put into words the horror he experienced. Exhausted, the survivor collapses. August 9th, 1945, 11:02. Although in pain, Yamaguchi gets out of bed. On the verge of fainting, the man nevertheless went to the Mitsubishi offices in the center of Nagasaki. His body still wrapped in bandages, he returns to his workstation. At the end of the morning, the engineer is in the middle of a meeting with his boss. The young survivor describes the horror he experienced in Hiroshima. The white flash, the deafening explosion, the shock wave and the mushroom cloud. His superior refuses to believe him. He accuses him of being crazy. How could a single bomb blow an entire city to smithereens? Yamaguchi does not let himself be destabilized and resumes his explanations. As the young man tries to describe the Hiroshima explosion, an iridescent flash illuminates the landscape of Nagasaki. Again, a deafening noise rang out. Once again, a shockwave blows away everything in its path. Nothingness again. Bad luck has just struck Yamaguchi a second time. 3 days after being hit by the first atomic bomb of the conflict, the man is located 1 kilometer from the hypocenter of the second atomic bomb of the war. Even more powerful than Little Boy, Fat Man exterminates tens of thousands of inhabitants on the spot. However, the hills surrounding the city reduce the devastating effect of the bomb. Yamaguchi throws himself to the ground seconds before the shockwave pulverizes the building's windows. All the bandages that covered his body are blown away. His wounds are raw. Yamaguchi flees the Mitsubishi office building, reduced to a skeleton, and crosses the field of ruins to his home. He expects the worst. His house is nothing more than a pile of debris. Fortunately, his wife found refuge with their child in a tunnel. For 6 days, the couple and their baby remain silent in an air raid shelter. Yamaguchi's health deteriorates. The doses of radioactivity suffered by his body are terrible. He vomited. Gangrene has infected his arms. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced on all radio waves in the country the unconditional surrender of Japan. Yamaguchi says, "I couldn't eat, and it was almost impossible to drink. I thought I was about to tip over to the other side.